Not all superheroes wears capes. Some wear wellies. Wellies.
The subject we were talking about a bit was politics, and I know everyone at home probably is black sick of talking about politics, so we're not going to talk about current politics of that. But the first line, I remember reading it, of Plato's Republic is, "Down I went to Piraeus," which basically means that the philosopher has to go down to engage with the politicians. It's a killer line. So
down I went to
Piraeus, where that's basically, it was Piraeus. It was the locality where the great and the good of the politics used to reside.
And was he the lad that was up on top of the pillar?
Yes.
All right.
If anyone wants to, he's Professor Michael Sugru, and you can look at his lectures on YouTube whilst they're still there. He basically goes into all the great philosophers and dissects exactly what their meanings was, and he's mind blown. And this is when he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. He was at the absolute pinnacle of his intellect, because that's something that I do think. I think you have, I hate saying it or that, but you get past youth a little bit and you have a pinnacle, and then it's somewhat of a decline, but it kicks in at different periods for different people.
Yeah.
But one of the things, we'll say right-wing politics, David.
Yeah.
First and foremost, one of the major problems is nobody really knows the candidates that are being put forward.
Yeah.
And there's a massive problem that some of the candidates that are really high-quality people cannot ever get a platform to express, why they think the way they do. And I can't help but think if people got to spend a day with you, they'd realise, actually, that fella should be running something. He's a very intelligent fella.
Yeah, and there's people more intelligent than me and more tortured than I am. I mean, one thing I'm able to do is, well, let's put it this way. There are four corners of politics, I think. Mm-hmm. And so in one corner, you've got ideology. In another corner, you've got ethics or morals. In another corner, you've got practicality. And in another corner, you've got humanity,
Yeah.
And I would be very much on the practicality and humanity end of things. I'm not really ideologically driven, you know. And am I morally driven, ethically driven? Yeah. But, I'm also... See, politics is not about a personal ideology. Everybody has a personal ideology.
Yes.
And if you are going into politics with your with your personal ideology, you're basically going, have you all worked out I'm right yet?
Yeah.
That's going to be the only conversation that we're going to...
Said every philosopher since the dawn of time. It'll take you a few centuries, but I'm right.
And if you haven't worked out I'm right, then your question to me is just irrelevant. So you can't do this with a personal ideology. And the more you fall on the side of abortion, not abortion, immigration, not immigration, or, there's so many different groupings that the more every additional issue you bring up, you divide your support.
Yes.
Every single time you raise another issue, you're peeling away a certain amount of the potential people who could support you. Politics is about, it's the one area where it's quantity over quality. It's quantity over quality. What are you going? You're going to get votes. You're going to get more votes than anybody else. And I was talking to the Independence Ireland guy, And he came over and I found him good. And he got a great vote. And I was talking to him about the issues, about the things that don't, he says, they don't care. They don't care, And he was probably right.
Well, it's the same thing. I was having a conversation with John Waters after his European election bid. And we were talking about basic things that went on or that, but one of the remarkable things he said, and I don't think he'd mind me saying it because it was a very valid point.
Yeah.
He was at one of the farming meetings.
Yeah.
And I don't know who furnished him with what to speak about, but he was speaking about things like the Mercosur deal, this additive to reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah.
He was speaking about basically what's about to occur in farming. And he's 100% right in what he said, which is that it's going to move to very large farms. Small family farmers are going to be pushed off the land, all that. But I said it back to him, and I think he'd admit it, and he laughed. He says, I says, farmers aren't interested in that. What they're interested in is how much more money you're going to get them next year in their grant.
Yeah.
And I think it dawned on him that he realised, that's exactly what they're interested in.
Yeah.
I think we have taken the wrong approach, which is we point out where it's going, thinking that will get you elected. Whereas what you should be doing is getting elected and then preventing where it's going privately. And I think what's depicted as right wing in Ireland is very funny. There is no right wing in Ireland at all. No. You have a minority, we'll say, of people who are real fundamental headbangers, and they have no support at all. And then you have, we'll say, a very large group of people who I would describe as centre-right conservatives, and they have no representation at all. At the moment. And the way that the candidates were depicted was far-right candidates, when in actual fact what they were centre-right candidates.
Yeah, because
the
government narrative is if you talk about immigration, you're a bad person.
Yes, but a funny thing is occurring where the government are beginning to speak about it themselves.
But they're good people.
Yes.
But they're allowed to.
But you see, the interesting aspect of that is the talking points that they're starting to use would have got you called a racist less than a year ago. So now all of a sudden, an interesting thing like the situation in Syria.
Yeah.
So people are beginning to show their hands.
They are.
So all across Europe and America, you had Syrians celebrating the fact that a former, probably current, but he says he's former member of Al-Qaeda, now has access to chemical weapons, and they're dancing on the street. So you're showing your hand.
Yeah.
And I just reckon Ireland, it's two steps behind Paddy. America now has gone to a conservative basis. If you look at the map of America, you're really only left with very left-leaning almost city-states. Then Europe, most of your large countries now have swung centre-right. And here's Ireland with what people think is a left-leaning ideology, but what they're going to witness now is Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are going to move right, in my humble opinion, because what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are made up of are people who follow the trend. They followed the left-leaning ideology because it was coming from America and Europe. And now they're going to follow the right-leaning ideology. So the only people I see getting hurt in this election are left-wing activists, because they're about to encounter a different government. They just don't realise it yet.
I think it relates to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. If you have an industrialised society, they've learned to behave differently. But the wonderful thing and the tragic thing about Ireland is we are still essentially a clan culture, a parish culture. And if you're in one of these industrial societies, the form of leadership you see is, like you get the captain saying to his men, "Come on, lads, follow me." And everybody's used to taking instructions and doing what they're told. And he goes over the top and they all follow him to their deaths, But in Ireland, we don't do that. When you go, "Come on, lads, follow me," you turn around and there's no one coming.
Yes.
Because what we do, and there was an old fella in the parish, and he, when I was newly married, and I used to do a bit of the Gaelic with him and different things, and he said, whenever you have a committee in Ireland, you have to have the argument first. So, have the argument first. Let everybody vent. And then when that's happened, you can start to bring everybody together. You can start to get a consensus. And clan culture is consensus culture. The reason it's so slow is because it depends on everybody sitting in the room, looking at each other around the room, giving each other the eye, are we supporting this or not, and they're all going, no, he's dangerous, and then finally, everybody has the argument, and everybody goes, oh, maybe, and then the over time, consensus changes. But what happens with Ireland too is because people look for permission, their identity is bound up in, and their loyalty is bound up to their to their tradition, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I mean, the amazing things was when you went to Newtown and Kennedy, if the tallies are to be believed, all these people showed up for the protests, and then they went home and voted Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
So what we're really saying, and I thought about this, in Ireland, we kind of like to have a look at what the professionals doing. So you come up with your professional idea, and you say, this is the policy on immigrant. He's got something there. So they kind of go home, and it's like when you look at the professional, you say, I could do that myself,
Yeah.
I could lay that floor myself. I'd just have a good watch of him, and I'd come back and I'll do that myself. In fact, I'm going to tell the Fianna Fáil he should be doing that,
Yeah.
And the Fianna Fáil is going, so he's still invested in his identity, attached to the person who gives him permission to be allowed to believe things, which is the local say. The local say.
I think you've hit on something very, very profound there. First, I'll make is that the consensus can be built without anyone vocalizing that the consensus has been built.
Yeah.
So you have a remarkably strange position in Ireland where 70 to 80% people agree that there's too much immigration, but nobody wants to say it. Nobody wants to be the James Conway character who goes, by the way, 8 out of 10 people agree with me. But then when you put yourself forward as perhaps the voice of the consensus, they can still go, no, too soon. It's too soon to vocalize that. And then there's the other aspect of it. I do think there's a age demographic thing going on in Ireland where there are people who have voted predominantly all their life, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And it's the old thing of you don't admit that you're wrong. If you have spent a lifetime voting for Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, and then all of a sudden you go, so what I have done is been wrong for decades, well, then you're admitting that you were wrong for decades. Whereas it's a very difficult thing to go, well, there was no real other options for decades, and now I'm going to go in a different direction. And then the youth have given up. To a great degree, they have gone, what is the point in my voting or getting involved in politics when my mum and dad are going to vote for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil anyways? And there is a reality in this country too. If you bought your house in the 70s or 80s or 90s or got your mortgage out on it and you're still working or maybe drawing a pension, you're doing okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young people who have nothing. They are basically working to pay their rent. Yeah. pay the car payment, all the rest of it. But there is a cohort of people in this country who are a little bit older who are doing fine. And they don't see the problems that we see, which is that mass immigration is putting pressure on the housing. You know, they don't see that because they have a house. And
They have, and when we were on the doors, they'll say, well, the economy's doing well, but my standard of living is not going up, and the cost of living's going up.
Yeah.
And that's their issue. So we have to say, well, that's globalism,
Yeah.
you know, and we have to communicate that message to them. And, you know, we can do that. I think going back to the youth, I think Ireland has been betraying its youth for generations.
yes.
And they're seen as disposable. I remember somebody said to me, I think it was one of these comedians, I don't even know if it was a good comedian, but he said about the comparison between Italians, how they treat their sons, and Irish, how they treat their sons. And that the Italians, you know, drenched their sons in love and pride, and isn't he a great lad, and all this stuff. Whereas the Irish, you know, that do nothing but, you know, and what happens is we develop a harsh internal voice. So if you listen to most Irish people, hey, you know, it's all this.
Yeah.
This is what's going on in the head. Whereas the Italian young lad is that's the
Cock of the
romance.
walk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the romance. That's the all this stuff. So now Italians probably betray their children too in different ways, you know. But we have been betraying our young generation for a very long time. And it's almost taken for granted. And it's through thick and thin, through empire, through the emergence of the Free State, through, you know, Charlie High, and, you know, a little bit, few more quid in the pocket. And it's never started. The attitude has never changed. It's never been done for the kids, you know.
Yeah.
It's not being done for the kids. And so that's, we've a lot to work on.
The concept of begrudgery in this country is outrageous because I've travelled a bit. England is not there. Australia, definitely not there. Australia is a remarkable place. It's such a young nation.
Yeah.
And because it's a country the size of a continent, there's this kind of view that everything is ample and, you know. And in America, you still have the remnants of what is the American dream or
Yeah.
that. But in Ireland, there's this begrudgery until you get to a point where you have this remarkable transformation where now you're the cute whore who's done well and you're admired. And I never can get my head around that. When you're going from, we'll say, A to B, you're begrudged. What? Look at him trying to do something for himself. Whereas when you go from B to C, he's one of us. That's a Sligo man.
Yeah.
Do you get me?
Yeah.
There's this pride kicks in when you hit a certain point.
Yes, and I've been a beneficiary of that at times.
Yeah.
And I find this really interesting because I think the begrudgery happens at a lower level.
Yes, it does.
And because I tell you what, and this is what you just triggered off in me, is that, and I've said it a few times, is I have 15 ponies between me and my
Yeah.
son, but I own no land at all.
Yes.
I've managed to get access to equine centres, land, all this kind of stuff because of what I call the chieftains. And the chieftains exist in our land too now. They're the people who have done well, who have money, who are from established families, and they want to help you.
Yes. Yeah.
They don't want everybody to know. They don't want everybody to know, but they see what you're doing and they say, yeah, you can go in there. I've 6 acres up there. Put your ponies in. You know,
Yes.
I know what you do. I saw you on TV, you know?
Yeah.
And even I say there's a lady, she's my fairy godmother. And she is a lady. She's a Gaelic Irish lady. And, you know, she had a great house. And I worked for her since about 1992. And she's old now. And I phone her every week.
Yeah.
Or I try to, because we've developed a relationship which is close.
Yeah.
She is like a lady to me, you know?
Yeah.
And she blesses me with stuff. She
Yeah.
would take the kids out and buy them bit of, you know, something for their phones, you know, just a bit of credit for their phones, and give them a, you know, take them to a fancy place and get a nice coffee or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
And those, so Gaelic Ireland still exists. There's another man, a well-known man. I won't name him, but a lot of people will know. He died just recently, but he owned more Connemara ponies than anybody else in the world.
Yes.
And he was a bit of a devil. And, but he was a dreamer, like I'm a dreamer. And he had money to dream with and land to dream with.
Yes.
But he wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted it to have some purpose. And by facilitating me, it gave purpose to what he was doing.
Yes.
And I could never ask him for money, and I could never give him money.
Yeah.
But he'd let me go and use any facility I wanted. I'd
Yeah.
just phone him up and tell him how many people are coming.
Yeah.
And, you know, so this can be done. But it won't be, you know, we need I've needed the chieftains to get anything done.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the corruption of Gaelic Ireland. I don't know, but it's the way we do things somehow.
Well, one of the remarkable things, like we've started this, and all of a sudden you get people in contact. What do you need?
Mm-hmm.
And people that you've never met, but they've heard what you've had to say, and they've seen what you've done, and they've went, "No, I'm going to make sure that works for him." Do you know?
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I do try to, I don't say it to everyone, but I just say it to the young people that I'm close to. You have to observe civilization for what it is. And at the moment, your generation was a far larger generation than what my one was. You know, a lot of people say, oh, well, the world population is growing bigger. And I'm afraid not. No, it's slowing down and it's reducing.
Yes.
So one of the things you're going to have now in Ireland is you're going to have your generation, which is a very large generation and has accumulated a lot of wealth and goods and services and all that.
I was the very end of the boomers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the boomer generation will die.
Yeah.
And if you're not engaging with them in some capacity to show them that perhaps I could continue on your legacy, then you're not going to get anything from that period of reality, which is the death, you know? And I often, you know, there's these stories in the Bible about inheritance and, you know, it's a subject that's taboo in Ireland. It's never discussed. You never openly hear discussions of legacies or inheritances or any of these things. And you have all these young people who are totally oblivious to perhaps your Uncle Pat needs a hand.
Yeah.
Have you considered, instead of playing on the phone there, have you considered maybe driving down and saying, Pat, do you need a hand with anything?
Yeah.
You know?
Respect is massive.
Yeah.
Showing people respect. You know, like these are wealthy people. You can't give them anything. You know,
No.
there's nothing you can give them
Well, this-
except respect.
Well, you see, this is where I found myself in and honesty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wealthy people really appreciate honesty.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've found myself sitting with a former mayor of London, in London,
Yeah.
banking staff, several politicians. You'd be surprised how many politicians give me a ring and ask me about something.
Yeah.
Because I'm the type of person that if I think your idea is moronic, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that it's moronic. And you see, they find themselves in positions where they're surrounded by family and business associates who never tell them they're wrong. Who never say, that's a stupid idea and it's not going to work. What they're surrounded by is yes men. So if you're honest with your opinion, you would be surprised how many people are willing to speak to you.
Yeah.
Like, and it's a strange thing. I do laugh at it. I can go to Sligo Court at the moment. The solicitors will speak to me. The barristers will speak to me. The guards, the kind of detectives and that, they'll come over, but I don't really speak to them. But they will come over and say, how are you? How are you keeping her that? But the general public think you're a social pariah. You're not to be talked to. He's a bad man. Whereas these people go, that's an interesting character there. And I'm going to go, like one of the solicitors, he's involved in one of the big political families in Sligo. And I landed to court with my partner, and he basically went through people to get over to see, what did I think of the election?
Yeah.
And he had probably been waiting to spot you there one day and ask you what you thought of it and all this.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is, the younger people, if you show a capacity of any description,
Yeah.
you are going to benefit from this. This is a wealth transfer. Do you know? There's no doubt about it. But if you don't engage at all, it's not going to happen. There's no one going to help you.
Yeah, we've got to. I mean, what young people what young people need is there's a word for it. It's and it's a traveller word, and it's the word when you're knocking on doors all day and you've got nothing.
Yeah.
And you're even hungry.
Yeah.
And you need so much money to get somewhere.
Yeah.
You keep on knocking on doors.
Yeah.
You just, by your will,
Yeah.
choose to keep on putting one foot in front of another.
Yeah.
And taking another rejection. And I don't even know what the word is, because I was told it a long time ago and I forgot it. And I saw it written in a book by a traveling man once, and I can't find the book. And this is how words go. You know, this is how we lose words.
Yeah.
But still, it's the idea. If you're being rejected, you're being dismissed. You know, it's unfair. Unless you keep going, you're not going to get anything.
Yes.
It would be better if the people with the resources had respect for the generation coming up, and please God, one day that will be the case.
Yeah.
That they're not just getting dole, they're actually getting some agency and some ownership, a share in this country. You know.
Yeah.
They're not just here to be somebody's rental, you know, to spin rent for a foreign investor. You know, they're not just a commodity, that they're actually respected as a citizen and, you know, as our future and all those things. But they're not. They're not.
It's a similar situation to the way Sparta treated the youth.
Yeah.
Which is remove them from their mothers, make them fight amongst themselves, make them, like they used to make them live on the street, basically steal and thieve and all these things for their living.
Yeah.
And then put them out into the wilderness and see who comes out of that.
Yeah.
And there cometh the man. And I can't begin to describe it. That's genuinely how the youth is being treated at the moment. Is, yes, there will be survivors and there'll be ones who thrive, but you have all these people, very young people, who haven't done anything wrong, and they're being thrown to the wolves.
They are, and children are not resilient. You know, this idea that it'll toughen them up. It doesn't. It gives them. It damages them. It reduces their self-esteem. It reduces their sense of things go well when everybody knows what to expect. But when kids don't know what to expect from the people who are supposed to care for them, from their mother and father, the betrayal is strong. And that creates a betraying society. And I think we feel like that's what we're living with at the moment. I feel it anyway.
Well, I think everyone at the moment, you look... what you really should be looking for in leadership and political leadership and civic leadership is characters who you admire.
Yeah.
And you can't. There's nothing to admire. It's literally the ones who have reached the top are the slimiest, the ones who are willing to do the most terrible of things. That's a horrible situation to be in. If you go back to the period of the classical readers of that, like anyone who wants to read it, it's Meditations, it's called. It's Marcus Aurelius's diary.
Yeah.
And there's a man who wrote a book that was never intended to be published. It was quite literally his own thoughts, so he could go over his own thoughts and then analyze them and say, oh, that's right, that's wrong, all the rest of it.
And I think it's important to say he was the pagan revival in Rome.
Yes.
I think, yeah. And great stuff. I mean, there was loads of good stuff in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I read that, I think there's a character who was basically king of the world. He could have quite literally said, bring me wine by the boatload. He could have said to his generals, I want you to go to North Africa, I want you to go to Parthia and find the most beautiful women and bring them here.
Yeah.
He could have done all of that. And instead of that, he says, no, I'm going to drink water today and eat a plain meal. And if someone comes with an issue, I'm going to try and analyze it and do a good thing. Like, what a character.
He was amazing because he came out of a huge amount of chaos.
Yes.
There was a whole load of Roman civil wars. And he was betrayed and he was expected to lose. But yet he went and if my memory is right, this is the guy we're talking about. He went out there and took the offensive.
Yes, into Germania at the time.
Yeah, and won, and nobody expected that.
No,
and I think a person who has success like that, success out of that chaos and craziness, I think it looks to me like ethics, morals, values were. He understood they were the backbone of strength and success.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can come, and he writes about it himself. You can come to that place through experience. And I'll say that to a lot of people. There's plenty of people who's had a young life that's been chaos. There's plenty of people drink, drugs, the whole lot of it. And you don't have to continue with it.
No.
One day you can go, well, hold on a second. And an awful lot of that comes from forgiveness. And to forgive yourself and to say, well, why did I do them things? Because I was an idiot. Because I didn't know then what I know now. And how many young people writes off their life because they think there's no coming back from this? And it's the same, you see it a lot of the time with an awful lot of gentlemen. If a marriage breaks down or something like that, like I had this with I won't say, he's a close person to me. Marriage broke down and he took to the drink, and not like a drink where we were having this evening where it's a few ones. He was drinking.
Yeah.
And he says, my life is over. And I went, why? And he says, well, how am I meant to continue that? And I went, you know, you have kids, you've reared your kids. They're fine. They're doing well for themselves. Relationship is over, but 3 and 4 marriages end in disaster. You were fighting against the odds from the beginning. You've done quite well. You know, what's the point in beating yourself up about this?
Yeah.
And who tells anyone that?
Yeah.
You know, who says to someone, you know, you've tried, you've failed. It was to be expected that you'd fail. Don't beat yourself too much. Try again.
Exactly. And look, some woman took you seriously enough to have your child.
Yes.
That's a massive honor.
Yes.
You know, even if it doesn't work out.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, now it's better. Look, a lot of marriages worked out in the past, less are working out now. I mean, that is that's a cultural thing.
It is, but it's not only cultural, it's a technological thing. If you go back to the 50s or 60s,
Yeah.
your marriage comparison was Mary down the road.
Yeah.
You know, how is Mary down the road doing? They're doing the same as myself. I meet Mary every day at the fence. Johnny's gone ploughing the field. My Tony's out ploughing our field.
Yeah.
They're chatting to each other across that fence. Whereas now, with the introduction of the internet and social media and that,
Yeah.
people have this wild notion that every marriage is better than their own. When in reality, everyone is struggling. It's, you know, everything's a struggle. So I can't understand how people aren't more forgiving of themselves now when it goes wrong.
Yeah.
It's like I'll take a look at men that I see on the internet, and they're 6 foot something with abs like this, and I think to myself, Jesus Christ, that's a specimen compared to me. Do you know? But I don't feel insulted by it, or anything. I am what God made me.
Yeah.
I could be in better shape if I'd motivate myself to be in better shape, but I enjoy not motivating myself to be in better shape.
Yeah.
So, like, where do you square the circle? How do I say it? This is a problem in Ireland at the moment.
Yeah, there's 2 things from my perspective. One is is getting to marriage. A lot of youth, and I see it with my own kids. You know,
Yes.
most of them are in their 20s now, and I just had my first one married last weekend.
Congrats.
Thank you very much. But she's in Australia, and she married an Australian. So there you go. She's probably going to spend her life over there.
Yeah,
like you
in
say.
Australia.
We talked about Australia earlier. But listen, what she's done is she's gone on with her life. Well, she's 25. She's married. She's, you know, they're intending to have children straight away. So, you know, that's a great result.
Yeah.
That's a great result. She's young. The 2 of them are young, 25 and 26. They've got over the line. And what I see with my other children, and they share my values. You know, one thing is that they haven't rejected my values, which is a great honor.
Yes.
And but what I do notice is when they find a girlfriend, boyfriend, and I have to say they're the loveliest people. I've never not liked a boyfriend or girlfriend of my children.
Yeah.
You know, they're wonderful, wonderful. But the problem is they don't know why they're doing it. They don't know where they're going with it. They haven't got a target for where, you know, and back in the 50s they did.
Yes, that's
They
right.
had a very clear target.
Yeah.
And the expectations, the women came down hard on men who were messing. And men who messed around might not get a dance at the local hall, you know. And, you know, there was a very clear selection process going on here.
But that's an excellent point. Because one of the things, and I think feminism has done it, is said to women, liberation comes from multiple partners, you know. And I don't think that's right.
No.
For men or women.
It isn't. And one of the problems is it's hard because, I mean, for myself and my wife, Valerie, I often say, and we laugh now, but we only started after 20 years. We started getting on with each other.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So we were fighting for the first 20 years.
Yeah.
So, but it's a commitment. If you understand it as a commitment rather than as a feeling of love, then you can do it. And no, it's still hard, but you can get there. Whereas if I was in a position where I was saying, how does this feel? It doesn't feel nice. I've just met this one, and now we're 3 months into it. It doesn't feel nice anymore. I'm out of here, and, or it wasn't meant to be. And I often say to my wife, we say, we've done well for a narcissist married to a psychopath.
That's a hell of an admission.
We've made it work. So all this social media stuff about, 10 signs of a psychopath, well, you can marry a psychopath and make it work, now. Okay, she's not a psychopath, and I'm not really a nice narcissist. But we have extreme behaviors, and they're not nice. And but we've made it work. And so what I'm saying is, if you're not in a relationship, if you're not spending time in a partner marriage situation, you're not going to have the children. I mean, back there in the 50s, an Irish woman, I checked it out, it was either the 30s or the 40s.
Yeah, 7 or 8 average.
That their reproduction rate was 4.7.
Yeah.
4.7. An Irish woman's fertility rate was 4.7. A Muslim British woman is 2.9. Now.
And that's considered very good.
Yeah. That's so the Irish were capable of doing this big time. I mean, that's how they got the North back, essentially, So, and it was Catholic Irish women.
Yeah.
Catholic Irish women.
But there's another aspect to that. Why are children now viewed as a burden? Can you identify when that began to happen?
Well, I've just listened to somebody's explanation for it, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. And they were saying because the adults have an expectation that they're to be satisfied, and children reduce that satisfaction. But for women, in other words, if you see children as interfering in your freedom, in terms of birth control, in terms of interfering in your job, in your all those things, then the children come last. And in all these woke things that we're seeing going on at the moment, it's all about satisfying the adult. The adult is the only one who has rights, who has, who can vote, who has any agency over their lives, and the children have none. They can't vote. They can't, they have no control. And those are the people who should be being minded, but they're not. It's the interests of the adults that are being minded.
Do you think there's going, because I think you're seeing it already. I remember with my grandfather and the older people in the family, there was no nursing homes. They were, they were sitting in the corner, and they had a flitter of children and my cousins and everything running around their feet, and then they'd hold all of us to a story or something like that. But they were very well liked in the family. Now, old people are seen as a burden. And if these children who are growing up now are seen as an inconvenience, why do people think that they will see old people as nothing more than an inconvenience as well?
But that's what's happening. I mean, I was knocking on a door, and there was an old fella there. His family had split up, and he wanted to talk to me, but he was talking to me about why he wanted to be euthanized. when he got too old. And the thing is, I wasn't going to get a vote out of him. I didn't want to really talk about it. And but I did. I stayed and talked to him for a bit. He appeared to be a Christian of some kind,
Yeah.
you know. But yet he believed that he should be euthanized, that he was in some way a burden. He didn't want to be a burden. He didn't want to be a burden. And I suppose people don't have an expectation that they should have any value, and that's very sad.
But that's a remarkable change in Irish culture.
Yeah.
Because
Huge.
you don't have to go too far back. There wasn't, and I'll say it, if one of your old people ended up in the county home,
Yeah.
you weren't admired for it. You know what I mean? It wasn't a subject that you were proud of.
No.
It was, you'd often hear the woman in the house saying, well, we've done everything and we've tried everything, but he's broken his hip and he'll only be there for a couple of weeks and we'll have him out, Whereas now it's kind of like, well, that's what happens. When you get old, because we're so busy working, you have to put them in. And then you have the family saying, it's very expensive, we're morally superior because we've all pooled our money together and now they're in there and we're paying for it, and we go every Sunday for at least half an hour to see them.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a zoo, And I despise the idea of ever ending up there. I want to treat my children so well that someday they'll go, for all his flaws, we're going to leave him there in the corner and he can give out to someone, and I don't.
I think, and I've noticed it in my own house. I mean, we have a small house. There's a lot of people living in it, and it's untidy,
Yeah.
But yet, all the kids wanted to hang out in the house.
Yes.
They didn't see the mess. They didn't see all this stuff, and it was because there was a welcome and an inclusion. That we listened to people.
Yeah.
We weren't, and I see that in traveling kids.
Yes.
They have a lot of patience for the older people and a lot of respect when someone is telling the same story about a horse that he's told 20 times.
Yeah.
The young lad will just listen as if he's really listening.
Yeah.
Because he's showing respect.
Yeah.
And that's there. If we have to get into the practice of listening. It's actually painful to listen, but it gets easier the longer you do it.
But what you said about the busy house and the untidy, my home house was the exact same, but it was a place where people could congregate because there was my mother would be outside with the animals.
Yeah.
Do you get me? She only came in to eat, and she'd always, when maybe her sister or that comes, she'd go, Jesus Christ, the house is in a state of that. But the children liked being there because they never felt that someone was going to go, clean up.
Yeah.
Do you know, you're under my feet, clean up or that.
Yeah.
We could just treat it as our den.
Yes.
Now, and God forgive me for saying it, most houses now, when you go into them, are not an environment where a child could be happy.
Yeah.
They're sterile. It's the open plan. Everything is spick and span. There's no such thing as I'm going to make a mess over here and no one's going to give out to me.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of, and especially women, are realizing that.
Yeah.
If you're a kid, you make a mess.
Yeah, you do. And visiting used to be a thing. People
Yes.
would go and visit. And, when you were talking about old fellas tell you stories, some people were storytellers, and they had, people loved to have them round. They wanted them to come and visit, and because people had two things. They had a skill to offer. They were entertaining.
Yes.
They didn't want to come round and give you a boring long lecture or an intelligent conversation about their own opinions. They just wanted to come round and have a bit of fun, give something, sing a song, irie up the mood,
But Darren, you've said that like Darren, since we started this, we're trying to figure out, because it's going pretty well, do you know? And we're trying to get a handle on it. And what you said, Darren, it's the art of conversation. So would you like to?
Yeah, that's what I believe anyway. I believe, like years ago, you had the Rambling House, you know.
Yeah.
You know, people came, people went. Like, the key was in the door from 10 in the morning. You know, you had your house coat, and if someone was at the gate, you whipped it off, and, you know, you were presentable underneath. And yeah, like, I mean, look, you nailed it as well. Like, it's every house is busy now. Like, 7 in the morning they're all gone, you know, dropping kids to childcare, off to work. Whereas there was always someone at home. There was always a fire lit. There was always, even in my granny's time, like baking bread was done every second day. Do you know? It was like lived in. Houses are houses.
Houses are no longer homes.
Yeah.
They're literally at the moment someplace where you spend the night.
As you said to me, actually, one time, home is where you hang your hat.
Well,
we were on about somewhere in England. At the time,
I've lived my life by that. My home is where I hang my hat. As I says, I don't. Here is my home now. I'm hanging my hat there, but I would never get so attached to a place to think that it mightn't come to an end. Do you know?
That was the conversation, and I was saying to you, actually, we need to, because we need to have roots. I was saying everyone is unrooted and uprooted, you know, whereas, you know, you have a generation or two here, like my son will be the 5th generation at our home in Tully Lane. People don't have that anymore, that connection, you know.
No. And you see, that's the thing as well with, you know, you get to Dublin and the new developments and stuff like that. You have absolutely no cultural or emotional attachment to the area that you're in.
Yeah, that's it.
At all.
Yeah, you don't, it's anonymous. It's anonymous. And you don't know the neighbours, you don't know all that stuff. Whereas, you know, when you had communities, you would have visiting. And I was just thinking, it's not just having a skill to bring, it's also having the patience to listen to a song and the respect to be quiet while the person is singing it. And then the other thing is, what I noticed a lot is young girls won't make a cup of tea.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing I'm very proud of my own girls is if I ask them to make a cup of tea for someone, they will. And that's actually quite a thing to ask a young woman to do now, you know, because they kind of go on, why should I make the cup of tea, you know? And can he make the cup of tea?
Yeah.
But actually, what I'm saying is, look, just come on, make the cup of tea. It'd be great, you know?
Yeah.
And then they do it. And they see how appreciated they are for doing it.
Yeah.
And how much it makes someone feel loved. You know, that a young, beautiful young girl has just made you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, these are all little where we touch off each other and share a little bit of, there's a line, there's a bit where Paul is talking about the Romans, and he says that they're without natural affection. They're without natural affection because for them, touch is sexual, you know? Whereas when you're in community, you have to learn to control yourself.
Yes.
You know? Like if you're in a trailer, a caravan with a load of traveling girls who are going out, they're not going to be wearing a lot. And you're going to be very close to them.
Yes.
So people are going to be watching your eyes to see where your eyes are going.
Yeah.
And you need, as a man, to control yourself and not show yourself up as someone who's got his mind in the wrong place.
Yes.
So, you know, this community stuff, you know, teaches respect. You know, you have to show respect. You have to show care. And, you know, you've just been given something, a bit of affection, you know, and it feels nice. It's natural affection. It's what we do. It's what builds us up and makes us go home at the end of the evening saying, that was nice, you know.
You see, in the modern age, and I can't help but think of it, you know, we've done away with so many positions that used to bind communities together. So if you take this area, for example, you had the Ramblin' House, you also had the blacksmiths, you had the post office. And we were only talking with Kevin last night. I'm really reading into it at the moment. It's this thing called third places. So you have work and you have where you live, your home. But where are the third places in Ireland now? Where are the places where people congregate and get to meet each other? Because the pubs are dying.
Yeah.
The pubs are dying. Post offices are closing. And really and truly, if it wasn't for sport at the moment, like I look at some villages and areas now, and the only thing that is really binding them together as a community at all is the GA club or the hurling club. Other than that, that community would have very little involvement with each other at all.
Yeah. Look, I do see places where things are happening. I see, you know, some of the church groups are doing things with their youth, you know. I know my own kids go to church. You know, my own kids go to church. They might not go to the same church as me. They don't go every week, but they will get up and go to church on a Sunday. And some of those churches have youth groups in them which are really well attended. And they do discuss the issues. And weirdly, if you want to see a integrated multicultural society, you know, some of these evangelical churches have actually succeeded, you know, and you know, but they will discuss the issues. And what you find is there's a lot of conservative people who don't want a whole lot of immigration, you know, and they will talk about it. And it's weird how the different groups respond, you know. Like my own son came out in one of these, he's 27, 28, and he said, you know, Ireland was for the Irish, all this kind of thing. And the Africans were horrified, you know, because they've been told, you know, you're the bee's knees, everybody loves you, and, you know, this is multicultural Ireland and you're the kings. The Indians were rubbing their hands and saying, go on, do more, or the Asians. Because they have a different perspective on this.
100%. And I don't think people realise, you know, one of the most significant groups coming into Ireland are the Indians. And they have a totally different perspective when it comes to immigration. Totally different. Then you get into China, Japan, totally different perspective. And how do I say it? You can speak to a lot of Indians or Middle Eastern people who have a very dim view of immigration as a concept.
Definitely.
They don't appreciate it. And it's a strange thing because they're here, they have came here and, you know, they have their reasons for it. But they have no problem going, but. So I had a great conversation with a fellow in Ballyhonus who had came when his father, now this is the story, his father had came over when the halal meat factories had started. So he was born in Ireland. And he says, well, when migration to Ireland was controlled, it was fine. But he says, now it's uncontrolled and that's not correct. Now, that same man, if he was to express that opinion on RT or that, they'd be horrified with him. Because they'd say, but your dad came here, and he'd go, yes, he did, legally, because they needed skilled workers in this field. So he came here legally, he had me, and now I'm saying, no, you can't.
There's no virtue in that. There's no big virtue signal there. He's just saying, I'm looking after my people. Last in, close the door. You know, last in, close the door. It works, you know, but it's not very noble, but it works. And if we can, I mean, I have a Sri Lankan friend, and he was probably one of the first guys in Galway, working in the hospital. And he said, the more immigration there was, the less I felt the warmth from the people. And eventually he just became another foreigner. Whereas before he was a well-known, he was known, there was a knowingness there.
Yes.
And now he's saying the more immigration there is, the less I'm noticed or known. And when I was knocking on doors, I mean, there was a whole row of council houses, new council houses, not a single Irish person in them. I still give my spiel, knocked on the door. We're addressing housing by reducing immigration. And the woman says, yes, an Asian woman. I reckon she was probably a Hindu.
Yeah.
And she says, see them people in the IPS centres.
Yeah.
In other words, she was probably concerned about how many Muslims there were.
Yeah.
And then Polish guy, yeah, they're always nationalists. They think we're crazy. And then
they do think we're insane.
yeah. I mean, I'd say he'd say, well, I'm an immigrant,
Yeah.
I'd say, yeah. So, and the big deal with it, well, I'll go back to him. Then I met, knocked on the door, as an African lad opened up. I said, we've got to reduce the immigration. He says, yeah. He says, I was an illegal immigrant coming in here, but you can't do open borders. He says like that to me. And then, the Polish guys, I'm saying, yeah, well, immigration is great, if we can control it. But if we can't, if there's no control, it flood. There's, in terms of resources of housing, hospital appointments, school sizes, it reduces the quality of life for everybody. He says, yeah, of course it does. So the immigrants themselves were, by and large, not all of them, but a lot of them had no problem discussing those things. It was the Irish that had the problem.
Well, you see, this is a point that I tried to get across when I was involved in the Irish Freedom Party or that.
Yeah.
To be speaking to people, and I said, you don't realise, because I'm well travelled. You get me?
Yeah.
England, Europe, the whole lot of it. The vast majority of Polish people that you speak to share the same opinion. A lot of Indians share the same opinion. There is ground to be made with a lot of immigrants who have came in who can now vote.
Yeah.
Because if you're honest with them and say, listen, I realise you're here, okay? If you're working, good enough.
Yeah.
If you're a draw on the state, I'm not your biggest fan.
Yeah.
But we do need to address this situation.
Yeah.
They'll admire you for your honesty.
Definitely, because there's somebody to talk to about it. Everybody else is treating them like children, infantilizing them.
Well,
like the baby. Don't talk about it. The baby will wake and start screaming. And they're kind of, I'm not a baby. I'm not going to start screaming. No, I just want to talk about, I can talk about this.
Well, one of the remarkable things is if you look at Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and how many foreign-born people they ran for the council election in comparison to the absolute minority that they ran for TDs.
Yeah.
And one can only conclude from that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil says, I think you're good enough to go to someone's house and sort out a grant for them.
Yeah.
I just don't think you're good enough for policy. So who's the real racist in that situation? Let's run the African migrant for council, but it stops there. We're very willing to take the votes for putting someone different forward, as long as it's not anything important.
Yeah, well, and it's there's grants. I mean, we were looking to if you get the 2%, if you've got 40% women, so a certain percentage of non-nationals, you get a shed load of money, and that's why they all did it. I think, that's why they make the 40% mark. We looked at Sinn Féin's accounts for a couple of years ago, They took in nearly 2.5 million. Of that 2.5 million, only I think it was 80 or 90,000 was private donations. The rest was all state funding, different places and schemes. So the state funding is massive, and that's why people do it.
And we'll end on that
Yeah.
and follow us. We'll go on to Patreon now, Spotify, exclusive for the continuation of the
Put
show.
it there.
Cheers.